did study this week, and it got to the point that I thought I'm overstudying and doing it to where I'm getting nervous about it. But I don't have a laptop, don't do PowerPoint, and having to do it the old way like we've always done, where you study the scriptures and you get up and read the scriptures and talk about them and you don't have it written down to read, it's harder. Believe me, it is. Today we're doing Tamar, the 38th chapter of Genesis, and I printed out some of these at home, and I went down and printed out some more, and I don't think there's enough for every person, so you might need to share, but it is the lineage of Tamar and Judah down to Jesus, where you can see that Tamar was an ancestor of Jesus, and it was very important that Judah, his bloodline was carried forward in the order that had been told that it would be. And so we're going to start with Genesis 38, 1 through 11. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hara. When it talks about he left his brothers, you have to remember that Judah was a brother to Joseph, and he was one of the brothers who put Joseph in the pit to leave him to die. And it was Judah that spoke up and said, if we do this, what's it going to prosper us except we won't have the spoiled brother. We could sell him. People come by and we sell him and he can be a slave and we'll split the money. Well, that sounded like a good idea. So even though it was evil, by doing that, it saved his life, Joseph's life. And Joseph was to be used by God, and it was very important that his life not end there. And so after this had all happened with Joseph, and I don't know how long, then Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with the man. And I meant to go on my cell phone and check how you pronounce these words, and I forgot. So Joe Beth and some of you know how to pronounce them. You can just help me when I get to that point. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shunah. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib, K-E-Z-I-B, that she gave birth to him. See, did I stop there? Okay, just a minute. So Judah got a wife for his firstborn, because that's the way it was supposed to be. Firstborn, marry first. And her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Now, in some of the commentaries that I read, it said that he was wicked because he used the same practice that his brother Onan did later in preventing Tamar from getting pregnant and having a child. I couldn't find anything in the scriptures that said that's what his wickedness was. It doesn't say. So it just says he was wicked, and so wicked that the Lord put him to death. And in those days, they went by the Levirate law, and which commanded that the next brother marry the widow of his brothers. And that, I believe I have right here. If brothers are, this is Deuteronomy 25:5. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of the family. So when died, it wasn't like she could go somewhere else to find a husband. That wasn't her right. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. So, if Onan married her and had a child, it would not give him any more right, because it would carry his dead brother's name and inheritance and everything. And I don't think I remembered that about the law. And so that's why he wasn't real into having a child with her. So the law was to be followed, which they did. And
Doris, it is a command from God, too.
Right.
It's not one they made up.
No, it is, in fact, Deuteronomy 25:5 are the laws that God gives us.
Yes.
There was one that was a little comical to me just above that. Said, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. I mean, it even gave really simple rules for living, you know. And said, however, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, he shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to marry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. And then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. If he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. And remember in the Old Testament how important the sandal as a symbol it was in so many cases. Somebody want to name one where sandal was used in?
That's coming up when I teach in 2 weeks.
Okay.
On the book of Ruth,
Yes.
when her kinsman goes before the community and says, there is another kinsman closer than I who has a right to marry her unless he surrenders that right. And so the other kinsman did surrender the right and took off his sandal as proof that he was giving up that right.
There's some other transactions where in business deals and in pledges, and like you would give a deposit on something. They would use the sandal as a symbol of this. So I think that's why Onan married her, because this is what she could have done if he didn't. But he did marry her. So I read one commentary like she did, but I didn't find it here in the scriptures because he did marry her. He just refused to let her have a child. Let's see where it was now. You know when I wear it like a badge of honor.
Absolutely.
And I'm telling a story and you interrupt me to inject something, and then I sit there and I say, what was I talking about? Vicki and I go through that all the time because she'll add to my story on the phone or whatever, and I'll say, I don't know, what were we talking about? So if I do that today, y'all help me, bring me back. What were we talking about? Oh, I gotta get back to Genesis 38. Just a minute. Then Judah said to Onan, now this is the second brother, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. And it is specific in what his sin was and why he was put to death. So she's lost two husbands close together. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. Shelah was too young to marry. Evidently there was quite a few years between Onan and Shelah. And so she had to go back home and live as a widow until he would be old enough to marry her. And I kept thinking as I read this, you know, if you were going to marry somebody, you sure want to check out the family first. Look at all of those, if you're a woman, look at all those brothers, because he could be next. So she did. And nothing happened. He was supposed to let her know when Shelah had grown up and would be able to bear children. To have children with her. And so Judah was having second thoughts about giving his third son to Tamar. And today we'd call her a black widow. Everybody she married died suddenly, you know. And so Judah's thinking, you know, if she marries my third son, my only son, and he dies too, I'm not even going to have a son left. So maybe she'll forget about it. Maybe she'll die first. Who knows? But I'm not going to bring it up. So he didn't let her know. And she waited, and she waited. And after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shauna, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. And when she heard this story, and she was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with the veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Elim, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that, though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. I think she saw him in the village or somewhere and saw that he was old enough to be her husband and that she had been lied to by Judah, that he did not. In other words, he withheld his son from performing the duty that God had commanded. And so that's why when you see pictures of Tamar, you usually see a picture of her with the veil across her face. In fact, the one that Wallace sent out this week shows her with the veil. And that's why when you think about her, you think that she was a prostitute or something, you know. And before, in fact, when I signed up to teach this lesson, and he passed them out, and we do this every year, and I've done it a few other times, and I usually pick a woman if there's one on a woman, because I think, well, I can teach this as a woman feeling what the woman in the Bible. And I picked Tamar, and I really didn't remember the whole story. And all I remembered was Tamar was a woman in the Old Testament, and something about having trouble with having children, but God used her. And that's all I really remembered. How many of you remember, before you studied this lesson, who Tamar was? Well, I know you do. You don't count. You don't count. Anyway, it's not a subject that you hear a lot, that you talk about. And if it was a TV show, it'd be rated R. And people that say the Bible is boring, it's not interesting, they haven't read it. I mean, they haven't read these chapters that describe that people from the beginning of time, when Adam and Eve first sinned, that all of the generations have the same sins that we do today. It's not something new that's been invented or something that's just now happening. Sin has always been here, and it will be until God ends it, and we're in heaven with Him. Thank goodness. And where was I? Let's see.
She was making herself look like a prostitute.
Oh, yeah, right. But I wanted to read about the walls of where she went after I read that. Right. No, 6. Okay. So when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." And I read where there were 2 types of prostitutes. There was the ones from the church, because some of the religions believed in the sexual sin that was part of their rituals. And the Hebrew word for sacred prostitute is Kedesh. Kedesh. Sacred, it means sacred woman. In other words, a sacred woman, and she's a prostitute in the temple. And a normal prostitute, Zonah, Z-O-N-A-H, are both used in this story. In Israel, prostitutes were required to cover their faces at all times. And so she sat by, let me see, that's in the scripture, right? It shows that she went to sit by the wall, by one of the gates that led out. And the city gates were massive mud brick walls with a strong gateway that could be shut tight against an enemy or closed at night for security. And we're all familiar. And here the townspeople congregated to carry on the day's city business, just like you would in our olden days on Main Street, where everybody gathered to, catch up with each other's lives and do business and so forth. Here also the city prostitutes waited for customers. No respectable woman would sit there or be there alone. And I think there was probably certain gates that were designated more for that. And it said no respectable woman would be there. It would just be prostitutes and men. So she waited, and she figured he has deceived me and not letting me have his son. And so I'm going to be the deceiver, and he's going to be the deceived, because I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to get my rights. Very unusual for a woman at this period of time to stand up for her rights at all. And as a woman, I do admit, sometimes when I'm reading in the Old Testament of a woman's role, and we're so used to being our equal, and to read how they had very little to say about what happened in their lives. I agree that we should be under our husband's, not under his rule, but what am I trying to say?
Authority.
Yes, under his authority. But I love that next verse then that says, he is to love us more than he loves himself. And so that is what you call a perfect union, when it is that way. And so she was a little unusual in that she didn't just take it and go on with it. She stood up for her rights because she wanted a child. And I think God's hand was in all of this, because it was important that Judah's line be passed on down, that bloodline. So he is supposed to be in grief from his wife dying, and it's a little hard for us to understand how things were done then, but he was missing her, and so he goes to a prostitute. And she was smart. He said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what would you give me to sleep with you, she asked. So she's asking for payment up front. And, you know, Dallas and Fort Worth, we have our gates, our places, our streets that you don't go down at night. You don't even go down in the daytime if you're a woman. But, you know, these were places that they knew where to go. And so like the prostitutes of today, payment up front. She said, well, if I do, what are you going to give me? And I wonder if she had thought out what she was going to ask for ahead of time, or if she thought of it at that time. I have a feeling that she had thought this whole plan out so well that she knew ahead of time, this is what I'm going to ask for, so there can be no denying. And he said, I'll send you a young goat for my flock. Okay, I can use a goat. And she said, well, will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? Because you're going to leave tonight and I don't have the goat. And she said, he said, well, what do you want? She said, your seal, its cord, and the staff in your hand. She answered, so he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil, put her widow's clothes back on, and disappeared into the night. The seal in that day was individual seal that was made and carved for that person's, the seal that, kind of like our notary seal, is personalized and it's ours. Well, that's the way the seal, that's a picture of it, heavily carved. And then the stick, that is something that they all used. As you look, it was rocky terrain there, and enabled to walk, they had to have a walking stick. But Judah, with his importance and leader, he had a special one that was made for him, and it is, just a minute. It wasn't just a length of wood used for walking. The tribal leader's staff was an emblem of authority, something like a royal scepter. It had the lineage of the leader carved into it, like this, and the carving went all down it. And I read just recently that there's some man that was a homeless man, or was this on TV, that did wood carvings, and this woman became interested in the sticks of wood he was carving, and so she bought everything he had that day. And then she went back every week and started buying these sticks, and he was carving the 10 Commandments then in them. And she was selling them, taking orders for them online and giving him the money. And it grew into a business, and some of you probably saw that. And so I thought, oh, yeah, it would have been like that. It had his lineage, which I'm assuming his ancestors down before him carved into it. So it's amazing that he would give up that personalized staff and his seal, and
It's kind of like Esau starving for
yes, yeah.
This man is
right.
starving.
God, he really wanted sex, is all I can say. He was willing to give up everything.
He tried to give her a goat.
Yeah, goat didn't work. Goat didn't work. Oh, at least the man tried. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Dulamite, in order to give his pledge, to get his pledge back from the woman. But the man he sent did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Edom?" So there was controversy. Did he think this was a regular prostitute or a shrine prostitute? Since he said shrine there, I'm assuming shrine. But what difference does it make? He was still with the prostitute. And they all answered, "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat. I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution. As a result, she is now pregnant." That's his daughter-in-law. How do you think that went over? So Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." Not stoned, but burned to death. And I was going to read you right here. In Deuteronomy 22:22, and that must be what fell out of my Bible. Yeah, it did, so excuse me. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. you must purge the evil from Israel. If a man happens to meet in a town with a virgin pledged to be married and he sleeps with her, you shall take both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The girl, because she was in town and did not scream for help, and the man, because he violated another man's wife, you must purge the evil from him. And it goes on to give all of that, and it said that in one, and I've missed it, that they were to be bound together, the man and woman, and thrown into water to drown, bound together. And then there was another one about the king could save the man with certain circumstances, and the woman would be burned to death. So it was pretty tragic. But thank goodness she wasn't burned to death. So when he's told that, and he said, bring her out, and we're going to have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, they'd gone and gotten her, and they're bringing her. She sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. They didn't have Walmart bags then, so I don't know how she had it wrapped up. But she had to have disguised it, or everybody that was bringing her out would see and recognize whose they were. So somehow she had them. And that note to him with them, he reads it and there's no denying it. It's his name, it's his seal, it's everything. And see if you recognize it. Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When it came time for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. Why was that important that they know?
The importance of the first son, first child.
Firstborn. Because twins, if they did look alike and they're born, there would be a decision to be made which one was born first. So, but this is the part that gets me as a woman. But he drew back his hand. After the ribbon is tied on it, he drew back his hand. And the other brother was born first. His brother came out and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah, Z-E-R-A-H, Sarah. And it really lets you realize how important it was in that day to be the firstborn and to have all the privileges of the firstborn. And like Esau and Esau's brother, when they were fighting for, there you go, Jacob. And of the other people in the Bible, when there were brothers, how important it was to have the father's blessing and to be the firstborn. And there was another one where before they were born, or as they were being born, one twin caught the other one by his heel. Who was that?
I think that was Jacob and Esau.
It was. And he caught him by the heel. This one, he already had his hand out and the ribbon tied on it, and he took it back, and the twin was able to be born first. Interesting stories in the Bible on the births. And so after the twins were born, I wanted to read you. Tamar means the date palm, which is source of food, shade, and life. And her first husband, spelled backwards in Hebrew, is the word for evil, R-E. Perez is the twin that was able to be born first, means he who pushes through, breaks through a wall. Zerah, the brother, means scarlet. Onan means the V-I-R-I-L-E, viral, one.
Viral,
This is ironic, since he refused to give Tamar a child.
Because it means life.
It means a man having strength. This is what his name means. A man having strength, energy, and a strong sex drive.
Oh.
That's a little ironic with his name. And that I got from Google. And so, and Judah means give praise to God. And then we have the following stories of the twins and Tamar and so forth. And we don't know God's plans for our lives. And we know that God takes people that you wouldn't think he would use at all. He takes evil people doing things and turns it around for good. If he wants something done, he rearranges things so that it is done according to his plan, not ours. And we didn't have a lot of prayer and praise time, and I think I'm about through, and we've got some time. And so this class has no problem filling up time with discussion, so let's discuss our lesson today, or anything that pertains to it.
I think it's interesting that Judah said she was more righteous than I,
Yes.
because God keeps his promises, keep his word.
He disobeyed God, and he knew it when he was doing it. That's good. Anybody else?
I hope we're not going to have a test on this later.
I always hated tests in school. Hated tests, believe me. We won't. Really?
I wonder how much it goes worth.
Evidently not as much as the cord seal and staff. That's
Another
for sure.
thing, the description of what Tamar did, when she took off her widow's clothes, she put on only a veil. So she has nothing on under that veil.
Oh, wow. It got cold.
So you see,
It was summer.
Summer.
I didn't see that. It said I figured she put on some kind of clothes.
But then she took off the veil and she put on her clothes.
She put on her widow's
So
clothes.
you see, she was very seductive in how she presented herself. And that had a great deal to do, I'm sure, with Judah's loss of control.
I guess it would if she was sitting on the side of the road naked.
Well, veils can have some density.
I'll be quiet.
Well, I think that's pretty much right.
That's what I.
Well, and another thing, you can say, well, all people grieve in a different way.
Well, it said he was over his grief, though. He had overcome his grief.
Let's see.
Because of his sexual desire.
When his grief had
Sexual.
passed, he went up to see his shearers. I think that's what it said.
There was one commentary that said there's a painting, showed the painting of Judah laying there, looked like he was drunk or something, laying there, and then Tamar on the other side of him, and said that he was so much in grief over the loss of his wife, and so, I don't know
That's not what the scripture said.
if it's over it or not, but, no, I just said a commentary.
Yeah.
And this painting, showing that was, but to us as Christians, we don't understand that you lose your husband or your wife and you're grieving over them and you go to a prostitute. And so that is just, with us. So it's hard to understand the Old Testament especially, for me, and some of the rules that they went by. Somebody else? If I had the laptop with all the music on it, we could play some music, which would be good.
You did good, Doris.
Well, I don't know about that.
It was interesting.
I just wanted to make sure that I got through the scriptures and that I got all of the story told. And I got that done, and we still have a little bit of time. And so if no one else has any thoughts on the lesson, let's go to the Lord in prayer.